Ow. Don't let me pour the water. I spilled it everywhere. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This morning we, I think, had a snapshot of kind of changing audience behaviour. Now we're going to talk, I think, quite specifically about that the way that audiences and content are, the relationship is changing, and what that's meaning for some businesses, for filmmaking, for storytelling generally. So we're going to start off with radio. I remember a time when we were talking about radio as something that as that's one of the oldie worldy things that wasn't going to last. But I think what's happened with Radio 1 and Radio 1 Extra in particular, I'd say, and the playlister service that I think we're going to be talking about here, is that it's understood that the relationship between music and people is actually changing in really interesting ways. So talking about this is going to be Andy Pulliston. And Andy, it's all yours.
Oh, hi. Hello, everyone. So, yeah, my name is Andy Pulliston. I'm the digital editor for Radio 101 Extra. In addition to that, I also run the BBC Music platform and the playlister service. Thanks for having me. It's great to be asked. I think that in amongst sort of budget cuts and redundancies going on at the BBC, we're actually kind of trucking on and doing some really interesting things. So this talk is really, well, in part sort of to follow on from Mike, is about sort of the music story at the BBC, because it kind of connects radio and TV and audiences in the digital space. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just sort of setting the scene and the story so far. We have recently had, if you're following the trade press, BBC has kind of announced a new music strategy, which Tony Hall and Bob Shannon presented a few weeks ago. So it's kind of an exciting time. Tony Hall has returned from the Royal Opera House, his kind of long tenure there, to the BBC as our new DG, and we have James Pennell, who is our new Director of Digital and Strategy. Both of them are huge music fans, and they want to see the BBC kind of continue their success in this space. And it's kind of it's a space that is, I guess, kind of changing so fast, and there are many challenges there, and the story that I've got for you today, I think, is kind of goes some way to kind of set about kind of addressing those things. So we have a, oh, there it goes, the animations, brilliant, they're working. We kind of have a long and proud history of music at the BBC, and it's kind of it's in our DNA, and it's a vital function of kind of what we do in our programming. In our radio services, and honouring the charter as well. And you know, you think about we took over the Proms in 1927, Top of the Pops 64, obviously the launch of Radio 1 in 1967, and you know, we've really been at the forefront of kind of discovery and delivery of music for a long time, and not just to the UK. Obviously, with our newer services, they have a global appeal as well. And you know, our coverage of things like kind of Live Aid and Glastonbury have kind of become kind of iconic as parts of kind of cultural history, and have been seen around the world. And as the digital age has advanced, we've launched new services in the form of 1 Extra and 6 Music, and new digital products to kind of deliver that content in the form of iPlayer, latterly iPlayer Radio. And I don't know, did anybody kind of watch any of Glastonbury on a mobile device or a desktop? A few hands going up. Exactly. So we're kind of making great leaps and bounds into kind of the presentation and packaging of those big kind of cultural events. And coupled with that, we have this this kind of unique lineup of presenters and DJs who are really kind of at the heart of our credibility and rapport with our audiences. We have this sort of, you know, when you can see, I mean, there are faces up there that I'm sure you'll recognise. There'll be some that you don't recognise, but together they form this unique mix. They are, in many ways, the filter for music at the BBC, and between them all, they kind of help shape and create the kind of the national taste. and it's really their role is to kind of sift through everything from the new, the undiscovered, the lost, and to bring that mix of music to the audiences through the radio stations. And radio in particular, to Mike's point, is that there is this very strong emotional response that they elicit kind of in audiences, and it is these people that really build the trust, if you like, that the audiences kind of keep returning to. So from a kind of numbers point of view, this looks pretty healthy, right? Apart from the fact that you can't see the top number. The one in blue says 49.3 million. I wonder if is there any way? Well, I'll use my voice to fill in the gap, shall I? It's all right, don't worry. So, yeah, it's in many ways the BBC is in rude health. Radio kind of delivers almost 40% of the value for about 19% of the license fee in terms of the people that it reaches each week. That 26.1 million figure is kind of pretty phenomenal still when you think about the kind of challenges that are kind of that we face. The TV figure, which you can't see, just sort of shows the power of things like The Voice and Jules Holland and the Proms and again Glastonbury. But there are some challenges for us in that radio listening, whilst reach is still high, the listening hours are declining because of attention overall is kind of being divided by lots and lots of options for audiences. And as you all know, the landscape, the logo that you can't see at the top there is Google Play, but pretty much the title of the slide is "Music is Changing and We Need to Change with It." So each week there is this sort of headline of kind of acquisitions and mergers and investments, new subscription models, and record levels of uptake for things like Spotify. There are new ways to kind of share and champion the music you like. Audiences can become advocates and stars in their own right in the curatorial space. And artists have got this sort of a new way of kind of connecting with their audiences without label intervention to kind of create their own relationships that are kind of unimpeded by those kind of conversations. But I think if you talk to anybody kind of at Radio 1 and people in the industry, radio is still kind of vital in terms of kind of busting out of the niche of the internet into kind of mainstream culture. That kind of radio play and repeated radio play on all those devices kind of around the country is still very kind of important, if you like, for ensuring we kind of cut through. But it's a crowded market already, has been for some time, and I think that in some ways that helps the BBC kind of strengthen its USP in that when you have almost infinite choice, that someone to kind of guide you through that and help you make selections and make sense of that, it becomes kind of really valuable for the BBC to understand. So at the top of this slide, the title is "The Audience Needs." Andy Parfitt kind of, when he was controller of Radio 1, devised a mechanic of describing the audience and the audience segments at Radio 1. And essentially what you have down the thin end of the cone are the specialists, we call them scenesters, they kind of create music, they are the experts. In the middle, they have something kind of akin to restless audiences. They're curious, but they are not kind of geeks in any stretch. And at the wide end of the cone are our mainstream audiences, the ones that just flip on the radio, flip on the TV, have quite a casual relationship with music. They like it, but they are not the ones to kind of break and discover new things within their peer groups. So one of the main reasons kind of repeat visits to the BBC is track identification. So this is a little excerpt from an email that an audience member kind of sends in. We get lots of these every week about what was the song that was played on that TV program, and there's other kind of notion around recommendation. So this tweet has been atted at Zane Lowe. It says, "I'm in dire need of some head explosion. Any tunes you can recommend?" So this is these two needs, this track identification and recommendation, have come up continuously in our experiences. So this slide says BBC challenges. Essentially, on BBC at the minute, there's kind of not much for audiences to do. There's not a platform to speak of. There are some things to consume and to listen to and watch, but there's not a whole lot of kind of linked activity that audiences can participate in. You're always alone, pretty much, when you're on the BBC. We don't really kind of connect users very well. like I say, there are very few options to kind of personalise beyond sort of something like the BBC Food website. Not much to do there yet. And consequently, because our users aren't logged in, we don't really understand them very well in terms of their behaviours, what they consume, which bits of content are kind of gathered underneath each user, if you like, in terms of their consumption. And as a result, we don't really have a data set. So unlike most modern digital businesses who really understand their customers, you think about kind of the Netflixes of this world and iTunes and YouTube, etc. You know, they have a very, very complete understanding of the habits of each one of their users as they're logged in. So, I see. So that's the playlister logo. That's what half of it, anyway. So. The top half is really rather lovely. It looks a bit like the bottom. Just a few more colours. So Playlister is our new product for music. It allows audiences to have a new participatory role on the BBC. It allows a new point of engagement around the things that they love. And it's built on these three principles of remember, replay, and recommend. So the endeavour is to allow audiences to remember any song they hear on the BBC, whether that's radio or television, to create a connected music experience. Replay is to allow them access to the songs that they have found through the BBC via a partner relationship, which I'll come on to in a sec. And recommendation, so this is really how do we bring the benefit of that data and our talent into the mix so that users can essentially discover more of the things that they like through the BBC. So really the kind of as its most simplest, we have put this button in as many different locations as possible. So once you're logged in, this button becomes kind of a point of action, and you can use it by clicking it to grab the track, essentially the metadata, the artist title, composer information onto your own list. So this is the iPlayer radio app and our mobile website. Fortunately, and almost ironically, the app doesn't have the orange square, but you can see there the musical note with the plus button, and they're on our mobile services as well. So small screens, all networks implicit there. The lower half of the Radio 1 homepage, you can see the timeline there. Every track that we play on the radio is dynamically kind of pulled into this web page. Each track has its own identifier, and therefore the button appears, and you can remember from there as well. And it's not just a radio story, as I say. So this is the website for EastEnders. We are now putting all of the music played into the web pages for EastEnders, so that if there is a song that you hear in the Queen Vic or in the cafe, and you just go, oh, what was that? What was that song? You can now find it on the EastEnders website. So, so for those of you that saw Glastonbury last weekend, you might have seen in the lower section of the website the setlist label. So we were running Playlister across the 6 live streams as you were watching them. So if there was a song that you saw performed that you really liked, you were able to kind of capture that information right there and then off the bat, and that track would land into your list as well. And then for radio, back to the kind of Laura Laverne. This is Laura Laverne's presenter playlist. All of the labeling is at the top, and she is using Playlister just like regular users. The difference being is that we've got a bunch of presenters who are using Playlister as kind of part of their shows now. So unlike my list, or unlike any of your lists, which are private, their lists are public, and you can choose to follow those DJs to kind of get more music recommendation if you're feeling kind of particularly bereft of ideas, or you just want somebody who you trust to kind of help you through that journey in addition to their radio program.
And you need to wrap up.
I need to wrap up. Oh, do I? Right. Okay. I'll blast through very quickly. So presenter playlists. We have lots of DJs who are using this service. We've got about 25, 30 in total. Your list looks a bit like this. You can see our partners here. You can export to either 4 of them. When you export to Spotify, the list goes here. You give it a name, and then you can listen to those songs in full. We also have a set of lists that we're curating on behalf of TV and radio. Here's one for the World Cup. Shall I skip the video, Mike? Yeah.
You probably won't. You're going to see the top of their heads anyway. So all the bottom.
Fair enough. So I had a little promotional movie. The reason I wanted to play it for you, it recaps what I've just told you, but I think the most exciting thing for us is that this word appears in it an awful lot, and that's a new thing for the BBC. We haven't really focused on the audience in this new way, but it is particularly kind of important for us to acknowledge that the audience are now at the heart of what we're doing. So a quick bit on press. That's the HuffPost that you can't see, but the original launch did well. And I'm pre-programmed as a BBC employee to warn you that the following slides have some strong language in them, so if you're offended, please look away now. Oh, brilliant, you can't see it. That's fantastic. The top one is closed up. Shall I read it to you? It says, I know I've said it before, but BBC Playlister is a fucking brilliant idea, so it works so well. So yeah, so I'm just going to spin through kind of a little bit of reaction here about how it's gone down. So just across Twitter, you can see people kind of adding stuff from BBC radio programs and reflecting that back into their social networks. That's a tweet to Lauren Laverne just saying there isn't one track they haven't added to their playlister so far, and again tweeting to Radcliffe and Marconi about tracks that have been added. So we did some things with BBC Two where the audience became the curators for Stargazing Live. We ran a list called Music to Watch Stars By. We used Twitter for people to source as many tracks as possible to watch when you're kind of out with your telescope. They were then bundled up into a list in our Spotify account and then shared back on social media. And here's a radio program data. This is the Annie Mac program. You can see here that there's been a bit of a shift in what happens in her show when the audiences are online. Playlist ads are now the biggest single point of interaction online as that program is going out. This is really new, and that data is helping that program inform how they sequence the records and choices that they make. So Glastonbury, you can't see the top one here, but Dolly Parton had over 8,000 track ads while that set was going out. We had over 250,000 tracks added during the Glastonbury week, which was just fantastic. So we're starting to get a sense of where audiences cluster around content and what they like. And then kind of from radio, you can't see the top one, but it's the top 40, kind of about 20,000 ads off the singles chart every week now. And this list is really just about seeing where audiences kind of gather around key bits of radio. So things like playlists and big shows do very well. So that's kind of Playlister in a nutshell. I've also been asked to provide the sponsored message for Sarah Dane, who's down here for the BBC. If any of you work for Indies in Wales, Sarah is in the front row. Perhaps you would put your hand up. This is Sarah. She works in procurement for radio music. If you're interested in doing any work with us, see Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just a quick plug. Thanks again to Annie. What we're going to have is the questions at the end when we've been all three, because I think you'll see some connectivity between them all. This thing was invented a little while ago called a phone, and it's got Twitter on it. So if you're going to ask, it'd be very useful if you make comments and questions that we can kind of put to the group as well. So if we kind of keep that going during the day, if you're thinking of anything, stick it on a tweet. In the meantime, we're going back to the BBC briefing with Robin Cramp from BBC Connected Studio, which has some of the same things in as much as it's about changing the nature of the interaction between content creation, technology and people. So, Robin.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Luke. What are you going to do? Are you going to change something? Do it. Do you want to just do it? I could.
Luke knows a bit of it, he can do it.
What's that? Well, I've got full slides, Andy. Don't have to paint any pictures. Morning, folks. How are we doing? Are we good? Happy Monday, one and all. Yeah, so my name's Robin Cramp. I work on a program called Connected Studio, which is part of Future Media within research and development. So just in terms of who's here today, just to get a flavour of who we've got. So digital sort of indies, digital agencies, freelancers, hands up. Who have we got? Who makes money out of digital? Just a few people. Ones with hands down, what do you do? Students, maybe? Students? We've got some students. People just keeping out the cold and keeping warm. God, clearly, there's a few down there. Excellent. All right, well, let's take you through Connected Studio and what that is. So, hello, that's me. Connected Studio, as I say, we set it up as an initial program of a one-year innovation program back in 2012. So probably best if I just show you a very quick video, a couple of minutes, some pumping tunes, and lots of people talking about what Connected Studio is in a snapshot, and then we can get into the details of what that is. So Luke, there's that slide if you want to do a video for us. Thank you.
Just over 2 years ago, I put together a really small team quite quickly to deliver the first event for our homepage. Now we've got experts from audiences, engineering, design and production. We're focused on delivering innovation at scale. What I mean by innovation at scale is taking on the big mainstream problems for the BBC, bringing in the best and widest group of experts from inside and outside the BBC, generating the largest number of ideas and delivering the most impactful ideas through to the audiences of the future.
We've designed several variations to our creative process so that we can tailor what we do to the output that we need. Everything we do starts with a creative brief so that we can nail down the challenge we're trying to solve and fully describe the audience needs that we're trying to cater for. Over the last 2 years, we've run 52 events, attended by 1,000 people, and between them, they've pitched 442 new ideas. 3 of these have already gone live as audience-facing pilots, and we've got 10 more on the way. One of the major differences about our creative process is that it's audience-inspired. All the way through, from the brief to idea development to pilot testing, we bring in real people and talk to them about what they need from the BBC. We work on lots of short one-off projects that can be delivered in as short a time frame as 3 months, but we also work with some teams for the longer term.
I'm really pleased that BBC News Labs is the latest in one of these ongoing partnerships. It's allowed us to put on events like this, NewsHack 2, and I'm really pleased that Connected Studio are supporting us in taking innovation to the next level in news.
Okay, so hopefully that snapshot just gives you a bit of a flavour as to what Connected Studio is. So in terms of taking you through what it is, so Kate mentioned about the brief, so I'll go into what the brief is on that part of how we get to that, because the key is the audience-inspired element to the whole process. And then we go into a creative studio, which is a one-day creative studio. And then we go into the build studio. I'm getting to get to the details. I'm just sort of mapping out how we get to this stuff. And then we go right through to the pilot piece. So this is where we actually put the thing into development with money behind this, that then goes through a whole audience session to inspire the audience, and they can help shape how that service looks through to that pilot, as I say. So the brief. As Kate mentioned in that particular video, every time we do a Connected Studio, so initially we worked across future media, so all of the different product areas, all the different services, the departments within those. So innovation's been one of those things that the BBC's done, it's dabbled in the past, but it's almost been a bit of innovation in the past for innovation's sake in a way. Whereas Connected Studio, because it's coming in from the top down, it's very much all these different areas have bought into the concept of doing innovation. So, as I say, everybody's own area within the BBC has their own sort of plans, their roadmaps, whatever they like to call them, about services and the way that they're delivering things. But the way that we come in with Connected Studio is very much about helping them shape the things that aren't in the sort of the near-term type areas. So it's very much about pulling a brief together around the areas that they really want to innovate in, but more importantly, the things that they don't want to innovate in, so stuff that they've already got coming through. So this is, that's an example of a brief that would then go public. So this is where the ones that put your hands up earlier about digital agencies or freelancers or people in the digital industry have actually want to get involved in this. But not only does it go public as a thing, it's also open to internal BBC staff, so they get the opportunity to partake in these Connected Studios. So once we get the brief defined, so people actually understand what they're getting involved in, we then go into the creative studio. So we have We have a shot of somebody enjoying themselves at a creative studio with a hand in the air. So the creative studio basically takes the form of a one-day creative day, and the essence of the one day is basically getting all of the expertise in the room, all of the teams, and we do these multiple things across the UK. We did a Coding for Teenagers connected studio a couple of weeks ago, which we did in 3 locations all at the same time. So we did one down here in Cardiff, one in Salford, and one in Glasgow against that brief. So it's very much about teams that would come to a connected studio that might already have a pre-defined idea, but essentially getting to the point of getting teams together if they don't actually have a team, so we can actually get people together. It's all about the ideas essentially here. We're not particularly fussed about where the companies come from or the individuals. It's very much about the ideas that can actually deliver into this brief, this creative audience brief. There's somebody else having fun. I think we've got some lols there. Someone's laughing as well, so they're enjoying themselves. This is the thing when we do a connected studio and say we're going to take pictures, and say if you don't want your picture taken, we won't take it. But these probably people did say, I don't mind being on camera, so I don't mind laughing in front of you. What do we think? Are we enjoying that? Yes? Yes, Cardiff. Thank you very much, and a round of applause as well. So the end of the one-day creative studio, we get to the point of having the whole thing judged by the people, the stakeholders that are there as part of that, and ultimately getting people to pitch their ideas in front of everybody. So you get a couple of minutes to do that, and then ultimately we'll shortlist those down to a build studio where we then pay for people's time to be in the room to actually develop their ideas for a couple of days. And again, in both of those processes, creative and the build studio, audience is a significant part through that. So as people are working up their ideas, they actually get to present them in front of the target audience for that. So it's actually sense checking your idea very early on as to whether it's a good idea or if it isn't. Kids are very honest as well in these things. They're, you know, a spade is a spade. They'll just get straight in if they don't like it. Which is great because it actually takes you on a journey to actually develop your idea specifically for the audiences, which, you know, is a crucial part, as I say, right across the connected studio. So as I say, into that build studio, which is that 2-day piece, a guy looking extremely nice, and this one there as well. I'm not sure what he was doing there, but again, he's pretty much enjoying himself as well. We get to the pilot stage after the build studio. Okay, so this is the point where we shortlist down to a couple of ideas that we can go for, where we put tangible money in against this. So we have up to £50,000 for ideas to go forward. And then when we get to the build studio, this is where we actually take all of the ideas through this piloting process. We work very closely with the teams within the BBC and of course, being able to shape those ideas as they develop through with an audience through that entire process. Spinning through those. So as I say, we started off as very much a one-year piece, but now we're very much into becoming probably on the hook for innovation for the BBC, actually, which is quite a nice place to be. So not only are we doing the stuff for future media, it's now being across the innovation at scale, as we like to call it in the BBC, which dips into vision and all the other areas of the BBC. And we're also setting up our national hubs around the UK, one here in Cardiff and Scotland, and more to follow. In terms of some numbers, I've got some numbers as well. So 2 years of innovation at scale. So Kate in that video mentioned a couple of things here, but ultimately, if we look at the 31 pilots, these are the pilots that we've actually put money against that go across with the audience development through to, I mean, these numbers, they're always out of date actually because we keep adding things on, but we're up to about 35 pilots that we're pushing forward with now, and these numbers are changed at the bottom, 9 and 4 live, and 9 going through into the actual development as we speak. So in terms of what's happening at the moment, we've got. I always like to try and almost say, like, you know, next week we've got this thing, but we've had a natural history unit. So these are the guys that do the One Planet stuff. We had their development studio literally just last week. So that's going on into a process now where we'll actually shortlist those ideas to pilot. And another one, we've got the Coding for Teenagers Build Studio. That's that shortlisted teams that we've got coming up to Salford in a week or so. And in terms of what's next and what the opportunities are, with no specific dates around them, but we've got the research education space as bracketed res coming up very shortly, and also some exciting stuff with the World Service as well. So in terms of just keeping up, I think what I'd really applaud you to do is actually, if you can actually, want to know more about this, get in touch with us here at Connected Studios and find out more on obviously the usual sort of Connected Studio sites and things like that. You can find out more about, and if we're in the break, we can have a chat. But I think that pretty much concludes where I am, and I've jumped out of your presentation, Luke, and I'm really sorry about that. Oh, there we go. Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, so the final part, you can stand if you like for this section. Mandy Rose of Digital Cultures Research Centre, which I think operates out of Bristol, the University of the West of England, as I think doing really amazing work. I think perhaps exploring some of the storytelling around the new opportunities in that digital provides. So Mandy.
Hi. My slides sorted out. I think, yeah, I am okay, yeah. So thank you. So I'm Mandy Rose, previously of the BBC, and where, among other things, I ran what was then the New Media Department here at BBC Wales. Now at the Digital Cultures Research Centre, where we look at emerging creative technologies and their practices and also their values in society. Often we do that through practice-based research. So some of our key themes are video games, documentary, which is my research field, and we think about digital citizenship and the value, as I say, of these practices. Both, we kind of try and figure out what the kind of social, cultural and economic values are in some of these emerging forms, particularly the forms where the public are involved in making content. So what an odd title. I mean, really, that's an odd title I've put there. But so I was asked to think about the role of the audience in the digital world. And yes, I'm going to speak a bit about active audiences as creators. But in a way, I'm going to come to an argument for the value of co-creation between professional media makers and the public, and the ways that that's emerging now. So to kick off, more than 20 years ago, I was part of a project where we gave the very new handheld video cameras to 50 people across the UK. This is 93, and we invited them to record aspects of everyday life during the course of a year. Across 6 years, while that project Video Nation was on BBC Two, we made lots of different programs out of that content, different shapes and forms. And we felt that the value of that content that was being made by the public was bringing something really new to the documentary space at that time. Here's a still from one of the 1,200 shorts that were shown on BBC Two just before Newsnight during those years. A short I'm very fond of, but I'm not going to show you, and I apologise that I'm not showing clips, but I haven't got long, and I've got some things to say. So this was a short by somebody called Jean Lee, a Chinese-British woman who lived in Hove, and she was 39 weeks pregnant and speaking with huge delight and pleasure, and also anticipation about this belly and the baby that was about to come. And we called this piece 39 Weeks. And I was trying to find a copy of this. I hadn't got a copy of it, and somebody said somebody had posted it on YouTube. So I went to YouTube just a couple of months ago to try and find the piece, and I put 39 weeks into the search engine, and up came hundreds of thousands of results, hundreds of thousands of videos by women who were 39 weeks pregnant, many of them featuring that pregnant belly that Jean had shot back then, which seemed so kind of surprising and lovely and intimate and unusual at the time. So hundreds of thousands of women making records. Often these are mentioned that they're vlogs, people who've been recording all the way through the pregnancy, making a record for themselves, for their family, for their friends, for other pregnant women, sometimes reflecting specific health problems that they're going through. So all sorts of different purposes and reasons for making and sharing these video recordings, and it just seemed to me to be a very nice way of just signalling what's changed what's changed in those 20 years, what's changed in that time in terms of the public becoming active makers of content themselves, and actually in a way very purposeful, very clear, very, if you watch some of these videos, you know who the audience is that person has in mind. There's nothing random about this. People kind of know what they're doing in those spaces. So 8 years ago now, Jay Rosen, now a professor at New York University, wrote a piece that became well known. He wrote a blog post that was effectively, he wrote as if he was speaking for the audience. He wrote about this statement he'd recently received from the people formerly known as the audience, who wish to inform media people of our existence and of a shift in power that goes with the platform shift you've all heard about. He in this manifesto, as it were, he ran through all the different ways the public were getting involved in content creation, blogging, citizen journalism, video making, and challenged media makers to really kind of take stock, to take this into account, to think about what that meant for them and change their practice. Particularly irritated he was by this kind of way that the audience gets spoken about as eyeballs in this kind of horribly abstract way, but sometimes by people who make media. And so challenge the media makers. You don't own the press, which now divides into pro and amateur zones. You don't own production on the new platform, which isn't one way. There's a new balance of power between us. So in doing this presentation, I thought to myself, well, so where are we with this former audience, the people formerly known as the audience, 8 years on from Jay Rosen's piece? And, just a few thoughts about that. We're seeing, as well as those forms that Jay Rosen spoke about, the blogging, the citizen journalism, we're seeing some really kind of very radically shifting and growing emphasis on things like gaming. And here's a slightly odd way of illustrating this in a way, but I've taken PewDiePie, who's this Swedish video game commentator, who now has 27 million followers on YouTube. Elsewhere, but I've taken video in a way to say that, to show the kind of challenge that gaming is beginning to represent, even within linear video contexts. Okay, so we've been hearing about Twitter this morning, and yes, indeed, I think Twitter is interesting partly because it shows a new way that musicians, a new space for fandom, a new way that musicians are relating to their publics, and they have 19.5 million followers for One Direction on Twitter, including my 12-year-old daughter. And another kind of space. And third, something that I am perhaps contentiously describing as commissioning, which is about crowdfunding, which has seen massive growth in the last few years. Last year a number of Oscar nominations were crowdfunded videos, which I think is suggestive of the quality of some of that work. And here, a whole bunch of crowdfunded documentaries that are available on iTunes, things we need to take note of. So while this is all true, and it's also true, as we know, that TV is going strong and has reinvented itself, in a sense, in relation to some of these new platforms, and is continuing to reinvent itself, I think these are places we have to be looking to, taking account of. But actually, I would question that pro and amateur distinction that Jay Rosen was making, because I think in a lot of these spaces, something interesting is going on, which is not just the public as creators, but is about the dialogue between the professionals, between the media makers, the musicians, and their audiences and their fans. And so, actually, suggesting that something. It's not just about the public as makers, it's about the public and the professionals in a dialogue as co-creators. And when we made Video Notion back then in the 90s, I sometimes used to feel disappointed when I was talking to people about it, because they'd say, oh, so those videos just pop through the post, do they? And I'd say, no, they don't pop through the post. We find the people, we give them the training, we sit on the end of the phone and we talk to them every week, we watch their tapes, we make a cut, we send it to them in the post, they agree it or not. And there was a relationship, and people used to be kind of a bit disappointed, well, it's not really proper access TV, is it? And it took me a number of years before I realized that that co-created relationship was a we're in now. So I'm just going to point to a few documentary projects that have worked through this kind of co-creative process. They're all available online, so though I'm not showing clips, you'll be able to find them. So High Rise is a major multi-year project created by the National Film Board of Canada with Kat Cizek as creative director. And I think a really interesting project in terms of how you can use some of these possibilities within a kind of public service project. So High Rise is a multi-year interactive documentary project which kind of invents a new field, the field of global suburbanisms. It's about those high-rise flats that lurk on the edge of many big cities, not right in the centre, often the kind of peripheries, that are often, you know, quite run down, quite poor housing, and typically in many cities around the world, the place where immigrants live. And so Kat Cizek and the National Film Board of Canada decided they were going to look at this work, partly because they were already in dialogue with some academics in Toronto who were interested in developing the field. So it emerged as a partnership with academics involved, and then they involved some residents in a Toronto high-rise who became partners in the project and have been advisors. So it's a kind of multiple dialogue and partnership, this project. And over the year, probably the 3 years now or 4 since it launched, it's come out as in a number of different iterations. So Out My Window, for example, is an interactive site that allows you to kind of click on and explore different high-rises around the world, rather beautifully represented within one interface. So, and it was made with an international collaboration of producers working with people in high-rises around the world. So, just one example. In a second example, Hollow. This is from the States. The maker Elaine Macmillan, who had grown up in West Virginia, and West Virginia, like many American rural areas in America that have had industrial histories, in this case a mining history, have seen a kind of depopulation as those industries have closed down, and those communities have hit problems very familiar to people in South Wales in terms of post-industrial valleys. And those communities as well have really suffered from an issue around the way they're represented, and people there are very fed up with that kind of continual representation of being problem areas, and in the case of West Virginia, kind of, you know, problems with drugs. And so anyway, Elaine Macmillan had grown up in one of those neighbourhoods and decided to go back to it, and thought perhaps initially she was going to make a film. And then when she went there, she realised that she just really didn't want to do that, kind of, you know, parachuting in, making a, you know, hour-long documentary and leaving. And she started getting involved in something very different, which was working with the community in McDowell County, one of the counties in the US that's officially kind of categorized as a dying county, where more people are leaving than being born. And over a period of time, she worked to create this lovely interactive documentary called Hollow. And she did things like she ran workshops with people in storytelling, and she sat down with them and got them to imagine what changes they might make in their community which would make their lives better. And so I was kind of looking at this project, and I interviewed Elaine about it, and I was thinking, well, it's, you know, it's kind of all very well, but you kind of can't tell what this meant for the people there. But actually, I found I got to some sources where people had been talking about the project, and it was kind of remarkable to see what people were saying about the way that Elaine and her team had worked with them. But actually, it was interesting because looking at these comments, it struck me that they reminded me a bit of the kind of things people said about Video Nation, slightly different context, but I was But the same kind of thing, people would say things like, I can't believe the BBC has taken me seriously, you know, me, Conrad Gorner, I've never had an education, I've not done this or that, BBC's taken me seriously. And it kind of struck me that there was a similar tenor to these comments. And actually what's remarkable about that is that, you know, 20 years later, with all the rhetoric of, you know, of participation and a universal access to making that we have now, it's still the case that the people in McDowell County would feel totally, you know, totally outside media making, that to represent themselves was not something they could possibly do. And I guess in a way that's one of the strong arguments, I think, for co-creation, is actually that it's a way of engaging with audiences who do not feel, you know, able to have their voice heard in other ways, or perhaps I shouldn't say have their voice heard, but have their voice amplified so that people will hear it, will listen and hear it. So a couple more examples then. Orion. So one of the people who was really kind of quick to start thinking about co-creation, in fact, and perhaps specifically about crowdfunding documentary, was a woman called Jeannie Finley, who made a lovely documentary called Sound It Out, which was just on iPlayer last week. It's been shown on the BBC a number of times. Though wasn't commissioned by the BBC. She actually raised the money for it after she was turned down a number of times by commissioners. It's about the last independent record store in Teesside, now doing very well after that documentary was made. So Jeannie's latest project is called Orion, the Man Who Would Be King, and it's the story of Jimmy Ellis, who Elvis's record company kind of used, I think is a reasonable term for it, after Elvis's death to kind of keep the sort of myth alive, and he would go around singing, he's an Elvis impersonator, singing in this mask, and a kind of, you know, big mystique arose around Jimmy Ellis, and she's telling that story. And Jeannie's been approaching this project in a very kind of dialogic way with the audience. So she's been involved in a crowdfunding campaign, and she's also been using Twitter, using a platform called Tint, which allows her to, if she gets people to tag anything related to Orion and their stories of Orion with the hashtag, and then Tint pulls all these different contributions into this one page, so she can kind of see different people's comments. People are posting their own photographs. So really kind of using social media to get into a conversation with Orion fans, so that they are actually part of helping her develop the story that she'll be telling as a feature documentary, as well as a kind of wraparound interactive proposition.
Andy, we need to wrap up.
Okay, I've got 30 seconds. Yeah, of course. Okay, so all right, very briefly then. 18 Days in Egypt, just very briefly, an interesting experiment in thinking about how you make a documentary out of the social media people have already created. And it's 18 days. It was the Egyptian Revolution early in 2012. And the people involved in this project went back and they actually contacted individuals who'd been involved in tweeting and putting stuff on Facebook, and got engaged with them to start curating their own comment to make a bigger story. All right, so I'm just going to skip through, and just one final example. Question Bridge, an extremely interesting American project where Black American men have been invited to address the issue in a way of their own representation, of their own situations in American society, not by asking them to answer questions, by asking them to ask questions of each other. And it's extremely. I really suggest that you take a look at it, because there's something. While the men don't make the content, they do make the whole project, because their questions are what drives it. And in asking questions within that demographic, they also point up by just how very complex that the supposed demographic of Black American men is. And actually, one of the things that's nice about Question Bridge, and very important, I think, about a lot of these projects, is that while they have an online existence, they're all about driving dialogue face to face. And actually, through Question Bridge, they've been on the road to museums, galleries, prisons across America, and they've had hundreds of thousands of Black American men involved in a conversation about their situation, about how they can change it, how they can deal with some of the challenges that they face. So, okay, that's me.
Thank you. I can ask a quick question that sums up a few of the questions that are coming up. We put the Twitter feed up on the screen, would be quite useful. Just quickly for all of you, I think what we heard from different parts then, from Andy, I think you were talking there about, I think particularly with the playlist, the way that audiences are being encouraged to almost create their own kind of music playlist themselves. That's exactly what they're doing. I think with Robin, you're talking about how you get new voices and perhaps new approaches introduced. And I think with Mandy, I think that idea of co-creation and collaboration, I think you looked at some very significant and interesting projects there. The bit that I still don't get here, and maybe it points to Pauline's point that's up there at the moment, is it seems to me that actually you've still got all these exciting things going on. The mainstream, in some ways, still seems to have got more narrow. All of the discussion and the research that I've looked at recently suggests that it's a tiny number of people who are actually making that content and making money from that content. I recall at Music Week a few years back, something like 70% of even rock musicians in the charts were actually public school educated. So there's that feeling that this is all going on, this conversation, but actually the tastemakers, the content mix maybe hasn't changed as much as we would like. And I wonder, first of all, is that true in your experience, and is there anything we can do about it? So maybe starting with you, Andy.
Yeah, I think it still is true. I mean, I think there's just the way that the mechanic has grown over a period of time. It's kind of very much built towards that model, and just because of the number of minutes there are on the airwaves and the number of shows that you can actually afford to make, you end up with a taste-making hierarchy. I think that's very much how broadcasting has evolved. I think that there is still opportunity for those things to kind of be influenced. I mean, I think we were talking kind of in the other room earlier that Playlister is really kind of in year one, and what we've set to do is to build the kind of ecosystem, if you like, or the kind of framework on the BBC to allow music to be kind of understood at track level. But obviously things in our roadmap are about allowing users to kind of go public with their taste, allow them kind of to connect and collaborate, and for their contributions to kind of gain kudos and things like that, and to build a system where those people who contribute meaningfully kind of get the recognition. But I think that it's in some ways, I think people like to be led. I think there's an inherent kind of human need to kind of to seek an expert out in a certain field who is at the forefront of all of that understanding, who has the relationships with artists and knows what they're doing.
But just quickly, I mean, I think the nature of who those artists are, and we see a lot of the old acts seem to be lasting forever. And the tastemakers don't seem to have changed very much. It seems quite conservative in a way. Are you suggesting that that's the nature of the way we are as human beings?
No, well, I think that what's happening is that a lot of these older artists are sticking around because they are the ones that kind of are able to kind of monetize in what is actually kind of a shrinking market. If you're lower down, record labels are taking less risks on artists. They are certainly not signing them for 5-album deals anymore. They're very much jettisoning artists who don't do well after the first album because they can't afford to keep bankrolling and investing in artists who historically might have taken 3 or 4 albums, maybe even 5 albums to kind of find their voice and become.
It's an important point. The economics of this actually is a big part of this. Robin, in a way, you're trying to address that, aren't you? I guess that's kind of what yours is about. But I wonder whether actually, again, the economics of this and the way that things are put together, the culture of it means that what looks like a dynamic way of changing things maybe doesn't make quite the impact on the mainstream that you would hope.
Sure. I mean, just picking up on that point there, I mean, for Connected Studio, it's a process to set up, but very much it's dabbling in that innovation piece. But for us, the tangibility is very much around how we put this stuff in front of the audience, and how pretty much those guys are pretty sort of shaping that thing with the. So I mean, for Connected Studio in its way, the success that we find for the things that we actually do. I mean, each one goes in front of an audience, and we can test those within a framework, within an orchestrated audience test measure. But as we evolve, we're going into much more of a space which is, again, picking up in almost like the Kickstarter environment, which is about audiences, putting this stuff out in publicly in a much wider environment. So we've done all of our closed piece, so it very much exposes that, and it's how, and this is where we're working at the moment, is what's the kickback from a public measure, what's the tangibility of coming back that actually shapes that? These are questions, do we almost like use the power of the crowd that actually becomes the commissioners in a way? So as opposed to having like a gut feeling as a commissioner to say like, okay, we've tested some stuff on this, but we've still got a gut feeling that we want to move on, or we want to do something more. But in this environment where we can push stuff more publicly, how do we measure the success of people saying like, yes, we really like that? Does it reach a critical mass to say, if it reaches so many, we can push that forward, like I say, like a Kickstarter type.
Yeah, and I get it. I guess that was the point on the previous tweet we were looking at as well, is that there's a lot of soft, nice stuff that looks like we're doing it because we're the BBC, isn't this lovely? And then there's the hard realities of the economics of this, where actually the stuff that goes on actually is with a relatively narrow elite, as it always was. I mean, maybe that's the point you were making, Manny, to an extent, except the projects you were highlighting seem to offer a way around that, in as much as you are, I mean, going back to Robin's point, you are talking about almost getting the public to be direct commissioners through crowdfunding. You're talking about projects which have a different relationship, but they're at the edge still at the moment. We're trying to do a lot of work on this in Film Cymru Wales, but they're still on the edge at the moment. The economics is still all congregated around the traditional.
So let's think, the kind of digital world reflects the social world we live in, and we do live in a world of growing economic inequality. We know that. So I do actually think that's a big issue that we need to think about. And I guess, as well as reflecting the world we live in, there is a danger that those spaces amplify inequality in a way. And I think some of the projects that I was describing, I think are projects to deliberately push back on that. When I think about I'm very interested by Twitter, TV plus Twitter, and Twitter as a way of thinking about what TV audiences are feeling. But I also find it a worry, because I think everyone isn't on Twitter. And I guess I would just caution, as well as clearly there's lots of things that can show you and tell you about the audience, but also we mustn't be simply looking at social media audiences and equating them with the public, because it's not as simple as that. And I guess I can know that any audience researcher among you would be looking at what that difference is. So I think there is a danger of an echo chamber effect in these spaces of too few voices echoing around and being amplified.
But in a way, you could argue that you were talking earlier about the national taste, Andy, which is kind of. You're all very young in this room, but those of us who are in our 40s, you grew up with a BBC that had a kind of patrician attitude down, but actually there was a national sense. I think there was a sense of purpose and meaning, and that the BBC did lots of things. Everyone of my age will know where they were when David Attenborough did his tickling with the not pandas, they were called gorillas, I believe, but they could have been pandas. But there's that sense of the patrician down, in some ways, because maybe it addresses this next Twitter point, because it was a trade, and because you learned your way through, and because it was very intensive, you ended up with lots of people from different backgrounds could work their way through. You could be a focus puller, or you could make the team work your way up. The independent production companies that we moved towards, in some ways, I understand why. In a way, that diversified it, but at the same time, you took away that idea of career, and because there's not a lot of money in there, you ended up with independent production companies run by people who were had to be relatively wealthy, because they weren't going to make their money. So that desire to get more independence involved, in some ways, you could argue has been a problem. And I wonder, does something happen after this? Is there a next stage where we're going to start seeing that a mechanism for bringing diversity in?
Yeah, I could speak to this a little bit. Radio 1 is in the process of launching its own. We're trying not to use the word channel, because there is perhaps the most effective label to describe it, but its own channel in iPlayer. And this is not an attempt to do something like MTV in the iPlayer. This is essentially a branded space for Radio 1 to put its mix of content, and in there will sort of be our live lounges and the sessions of acts that we film. But obviously, for those of you that have paid attention to Radio 1 on Sunday nights, we now have a programme on for 2 hours starring Dan and Phil, two YouTube super users who we found through an auditioning process in Edinburgh. They are like QDPie. They are the kind of super users on the platform who have monetized the platform to their own ends. They don't need Radio 1 to earn a living. In many ways, Radio 1 needs a relationship with YouTube super users because they are the ones who bring an audience to Radio 1, and they kind of have inverted the model in a way. And they are on Radio 1 to kind of learn how to kind of become better broadcasters and to deliver what they do into the radio airwaves. But essentially, they have kind of come from the world that Mandy kind of was alluding to. The iPlayer channel, I think, will seek to do more in that. I don't really like the term user-generated content because it's becoming a much more level playing field now. But it will attempt to create containers, if you like, into which those things.
So that economics might build up from below. Yeah. I mean, this is great. These are all obviously your questions from Twitter here. Hopefully, they're useful. Does anyone have any questions outside of the ones they'd already asked here? No? Well, I guess these are your questions anyway. But just before, let's just leave on a positive note for lunch then. Mandy, starting with you. I mean, you are. We've talked, I think, here about from all of those points that have been made from the audience about the concern that actually the same old thing stays. But do you see a change here that actually could be very positive in the things that you're seeing? Could you see the growth, maybe just through a few projects that we all get excited about? What makes the world better in your view, looking at from your own experience?
Well, I think those partnership relationships are for content creators, for thinking about documentaries about telling stories about the shared world we live in. Yeah. Well, what could enrich those stories more than involving the people who experience the issue every day? So I think there's something extremely positive in these potentials. Yeah. Okay, and Robin.
I think from certainly it taps into that very much, that last tweet actually about how the BBC does it change, and I think certainly narrowing the barriers to entry, and as I mentioned in my presentation, very much around the ideas rather than who the corporations are. So if the ideas from the perspective of where we come from, innovation is all about the ideas. It's how we can, as the BBC, develop those through. So bringing through the next, as a freelancer, access into the BBC that they wouldn't normally have through those, normal larger barriers to entry, really.
See that, Andy?
Yeah. So I'd just like to reflect on a programme I saw last year. It was called The Great British Year. It was screened on BBC One. It was a series of, I think it was 4 episodes dedicated to each season, shot in HD from multiple locations around the UK. As I was watching it, I looked at it and thought, how on earth have they sent this many crews to this many locations to get all of this footage? And actually, at the end of the series, they showed you how they did it. It was done by engaging a whole load of budding amateur enthusiasts who were good at shooting time-lapse photography in the great outdoors, and the program was assembled through a community of users rather than BBC production company. BBC became a kind of coordinator of those people rather than the commissioner in its own right, and actually it was a fantastic program, and I've been talking about that model to other people inside the BBC going forward. It's a good one.
Sounds great. Did I miss a question? No, I thought someone had their... Oh, someone did have their hand up.
Just a question about the IP for these co-generated ideas. Who would own the IP if you generated the idea and then it went through the connected process?
That is a very good question, and it's one that we've established right from the word go. So essentially, it works on a premise of a 75%. So if the core of the idea is 75% owned by, say, the independent that's coming into the mix for that, then that IP stays with the independent. The BBC is not in the place to actually say you know, we want to build up a whole IP store. You know, in terms of taking those ideas forward, we'd take an option on that. And if we decide for whatever reason that we don't want to progress with that, we'll relinquish that, and that IP can remain with the independent.
But it is a really important point you're raising, actually, because it comes down again. Maybe that's a way to wrap up, and apologise for not saying it's very dark out there. People can wave their iPhones or something; it would be easier, or light a little match, anything. But if you, I think I think in summing up what you're doing here, I mean, I think there is a number of things that we've been hearing all morning from Microsoft and Twitter. Is that things have unquestionably changed. The relationship between user and content has unquestionably changed because the technology has allowed it to be so, and we're now beginning increasingly to understand how that relationship works. And that's a lot of our businesses, including, I would argue, Playlister, is really about people have found new ways to express themselves. It's kind of the new ownership in a way, isn't it? You can express to others, you can choose for your own individual use. The question that I think is coming up that we'll be addressing again during this afternoon is what's the social value in that, and particularly what's the economic value in that? If the economic base remains, which is your IP question, I think, if the IP remains where it was before, and if there is no business model that allows the money to be made, you're still possibly having a narrow base of professionals having a much more efficient way to have a relationship with audiences. And I think all of you are suggesting at the end there that maybe we need to see beyond that. Maybe that's what the Microsoft's Rise of the Humans is talking about, that eventually we move beyond being happy customers and start being collaborators. Now, while you're having your lunch and you're outside, in the Arwen Lounge, there's a number of initiatives going on from Cardiff Council and various internet service providers, a lot of really interesting innovation that's happening right here. So over lunch, if you get a chance, the Arwen Lounge will be a good place to pay a visit. Enjoy your lunch, and we'll be back at 1:15. Well done, that was great.